In this video, we'll dive into the metagame of Pokemon TCG Pocket. I'll be ranking some of the most popular decks in the current meta, from C tier all the way to SS tier. With such a vast pool of cards, there are countless deck variations that you can run. However, this discussion will focus on more commonly seen decks, particularly those that have frequent appearances in online tournaments. If your favorite deck isn't mentioned, let me know in the comments. Share what deck you run, your build, and how it matches up against others, and I'll discuss those in a future video. With that said, let's get started. Starting off with the C tier decks. Now, these are decks that are still viable but lack the consistency and impact of higher tier options. While not inherently bad, they can struggle against stronger decks in the meta, but they can still make waves, especially in some favorable matchups. The first deck on this tier list is Blastoise EX. Blastoise, while a tank, is a stage 2 Pokemon, meaning that the setup time is slow. Its main attack also requires 5 energies to deal the full amount of damage, making it heavily reliant on Misty for acceleration. Though not a terrible choice, it's just slow and inconsistent. Next, we have Gengar EX. Gengar's ability to restrict supporter cards is excellent, but it takes way too long to set up. By the time that it's fully operational, its ability often loses its early game impact. Its 100 damage attack is also a bit underwhelming for being a stage 2, and falls short compared to other big psychic decks. Next, we have Machamp EX. Machamp's straightforward 120 damage attack for 3 energies is pretty decent, but it lacks special effects or utility. Its psychic weakness, which is a very common type in the meta, further limits its viability. It can still deal hefty, consistent damage, but it kinda lacks what would make it a top tier deck. And finally, we have Wigglytuff EX. Wigglytuff can be frustrating to face due to its sleep-inducing abilities, but its heavy reliance on coin flips, on top of lack of reliable support cards, make it way too inconsistent to compete effectively against the big dogs. Now let's move up to the B tier. B tier decks are more consistent, with better support and strategy, but they often face issues in the early game or rely way too much on a certain gimmick to fully perform. Some are also very reliant on good matchups and struggle to close out matches. The first deck on this list is Venusaur EX. This deck shines with healing abilities. Venusaur can heal through its own moves and from support from Butterfree and Erica, making it very difficult to KO. However, it's very slow to set up, requiring 2 fully evolved Pokemon, which means you'll need a lot of good draws. Next is Lapras EX. Lapras offers decent HP for a basic Pokemon and decent healing abilities as well. Its early game damage with Misty support is pretty good, however in the late game it does falter due to its low damage output as well as not being able to heal enough. Next is Marowak EX. Marowak's strength lies in the ability to deal significant damage early on with low energy cost, as well as being a stage 1 evolution. However, its reliance on coin flips makes it very inconsistent, especially in the late game where you need to land 2 heads in order to take out a target. And lastly, we have Alakazam. Alakazam excels against decks that rely on high energy attackers. Its damage scales with the number of energy on your opponent's Pokemon, so it's very strong versus heavy hitters like Gyarados, Charizard, Mewtwo, etc. However, it struggles against low energy, fast-paced decks like Pikachu or Starmie. Now, let's move up to the A tier decks. These decks pack a punch and can usually perform well in most matchups. However, they rely a bit too much on a strong starting hand. The first deck is Pidgeot EX. Pidgeot thrives against decks that require significant setup since it can deal consistent bench damage. Pairing it with the Pokeflute item allows for repeated knockouts of weaker Pokemon, which can help you get points easily. Next, we have the beast itself, Charizard EX. Charizard's raw power makes it formidable, but its slow setup time and reliance on consistent coin flips with Moltres will hinder its performance against faster paced decks. As powerful as this deck is, unfortunately there are other fire decks that just do it better. Next we have Aerodactyl EX. Aerodactyl prevents your opponents from evolving, which is a very powerful gimmick against stage 2 decks. However, its reliance on drawing Old Amber early makes it pretty inconsistent, as it's not a basic Pokemon that you can search up with Pokeball. Another great deck is Lieutenant Surge. This deck features Raichu and Electabuzz. This deck deals heavy damage to the bench Pokemon without needing any evolutions. With very low energy cost and support cards like X-Speed and Lieutenant Surge to add flexibility and speed, this deck can be a real heavy hitter. One of my favorite decks in this tier is Dragonite. Draco Meteor deals heavy damage across the board. With new support from cards like Druddigon and cards like Jigglypuff, it can stall long enough to set up. However, its high energy demands make it a bit slower than other options. And lastly, we have Executor. Executor EX excels in the early game with its low energy requirement and tanky 160 HP. While reliant on coin flips, it can dominate early on. Also, running a regular Executor to counter high energy decks make this a very solid deck in almost any matchup. Alright, now we're talking. S tier decks are consistent and very powerful, constantly top-cutting tournaments, versatile enough to handle pretty much any matchup. And the first deck on this list is the infamous Celebi EX. Paired with Serperior, Celebi can one-shot most opponents thanks to its numerous coin flips. Its status as a basic Pokemon also make it easy to set up, though having to set up Serperior makes this deck kinda slow in the early game. Next is Arcanine EX. This deck combines firepower with flexibility. Moltres helps set up energies early on, and the addition of Volcarona to the game greatly benefited this deck, as you can now reliably hit the bench as well. This deck hits hard with a lot of versatility. Up next, we have the Weezing deck. This deck was already solid with Muck, but now Scolipede offers a whole new strategy that's even more powerful. With cards like Leaf and Koga, it's easy to shuffle Weezing in and out for your poison strategies. Its low energy cost as well as favorable matchups against Psychic decks make this a very strong contender in the meta. Next is Starmie EX. Starmie's low energy, high damage attack makes it a standout early game attacker. The addition of Vaporeon helped make this deck even better, since the energy shuffling allows Articuno to set up and clean up in the late game with its powerful bench damage. Misty support also makes this deck fast and very consistent. Now we have yet another fire deck in the S tier. This time, it's the Blaine deck, a hyper-offensive build featuring Magmar, Ninetales, and Rapidash. This deck is all about speed and consistency in the early game. Its low energy cost and ease of use makes it a very formidable and powerful deck. No tier 2 evolutions, no EX Pokemon, just straight firepower from turn 1. And finally, closing out this tier, we have Golem. The new Golem from Mythical Island is a tanky powerhouse. While it takes a bit to set up, with a 120 damage attack that provides 30 damage reduction combined with 160 HP, this makes Golem an absolute wall that is very hard to take down. Support from Brock, as well as cards like Druddigon to stall, Marshadow for revenge kills, and Hitmonlee to hit the bench make this deck even more resilient. And now, the top of the list, the SS tier decks. SS tier decks represent the pinnacle of competitive play. They are highly consistent, powerful, and are frequently seen winning big tournaments across the world. The first deck on this list is Gyarados EX, a stage 2 monster with high bulk and 140 consistent damage. Misty accelerates its energy needs, while Druddigon provides excellent stalling while you set up Gyarados. Greninja is also an amazing option for bench sniping basic Pokemon and finishing off stronger targets alongside Gyarados' huge damage. This deck has an answer for pretty much everything. Next, we have Pikachu EX. Pikachu's speed and simplicity make it a staple. Its 90 damage attack for 2 energies is reliable and very consistent. Pairing it with Zapdos allows for devastating one-shots with its potential 200 damage. Zebstrika is a staple in this deck, offering bench sniping capabilities to further enhance its versatility. This helps in matchups like Gyarados, where you can take out the benched Magikarp before it even gets a chance to evolve. And finally, the last deck in the SS tier is Mewtwo EX, a timeless powerhouse. Mewtwo, who was already a major threat, has only gotten better with the addition of Mew EX, which counters mirror matchups and other major threats. Psychic type's strong support options ensure that Mewtwo will remain a top tier choice. On top of that, their only weakness are dark type decks, which are not very common at all in the meta. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the rest of the TCG Pocket content on my channel. I have a couple of videos where I go over individual top tier decks and explain their most common strategies and builds. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to let me know what kind of TCG Pocket content you'd like to see next.